If you've ever looked at a runway and thought, why does it feel like we're always discovering Black genius after the fact? Then today is your episode, because the designer that we're talking about didn't just break barriers, he kicked the door in, smiled while doing it, and turned fashion into a letter to Black joy and a direct challenge to the industry's comfort zone. His name? Patrick Kelly, Mississippi born, Paris made, and criminally under-celebrated for how much he changed the language of the 1980s fashion in a very short window.
Patrick just had this infectious personality, and people just gravitated toward him. You can feel that when you see the videos of him in his fashion shows. He was just exuberant, energetic, and friendly. He was there at the right time. He was different from the other ready-to-wear designers and had much more spirit. His collections were very much about self-expression, and today fashion is much more about the brand. You're old news if you don't have a perfume or sunglasses or something to carry on your legacy, whether you're, the original designer is alive or not.
Now, he didn't come from privilege. He didn't come from the right circles. He didn't even come with the fashion world's preferred resume. What he did come with was vision, nerve, humor, and a message so simple it sounds soft until you realize how radical it was. I want my clothes to make you smile. And I'm telling you right now because by the end of this video, you're going to understand why Patrick Kelly isn't just a designer you should know. He's a designer the fashion archives cannot afford to keep treating like a footnote. The fashion industry loves Black culture, as always, but historically, it has been hesitant to fully honor Black creators, especially when the creator is bold, unapologetic, and refuses to code switch their identity into something easier to sell. Patrick Kelly didn't do easier. He built a world where Black Southern roots, pop culture, fashion history, and social commentary could exist in the same garment without explanation and without apology. And that's the one reason that he's such a perfect fit for the Black fashion archives, because Patrick's story isn't just about style. It's about who gets archived, who gets credited, and who gets quietly edited out. Here's the part that should make you pause. Patrick Kelly's international success spans only a handful of years, yet museums and historians still describe his work as potent, witty, and culturally loaded. That's impact and that's legacy.
The fashion icon in his life at that time was his grandmother. For him, she was always beautifully turned out. And also, he recalls the women in his church in their Sunday best, the ladies with their hats and gloves, fully accessorized. And that's something that you see in the way he dresses on the runway. It's head-to-toe dressing.
Patrick Kelly was born in Vicksburg, Mississippi, September 24th, 1954. He ends up in Paris, and not as someone begging for a seat. He ends up as someone who becomes impossible to ignore. And Paris mattered because for many Black American creatives, especially in past decades, Europe sometimes offered what the U.S. would not: room to be seen as an artist first and not a risk first. But Patrick didn't relocate. What he did was repositioned himself. He built Patrick Kelly Paris, a label and an identity that said, I belong here. My ideas belong here. And if you're thinking, okay, but did the establishment really accept him? This is where the receipts come in. So in 1988, Patrick Kelly became the first American and widely noted as the first African American invited to enjoy and join the ultra-exclusive Chamber of Trade Association of Pret-a-Porter for couturiers and fashion designers, which is the body that's tied to the French ready-to-wear calendar and industry recognition. Let that land, because this wasn't just a nice article. This wasn't just a token invitation. This was a stamp that placed him in the same professional universe as the houses the world already treats like royalty. And it meant that he could stage shows in major venues, including the Louvre, a level of legitimacy that the industry rarely handed to someone with his background. So when people ask, was Patrick Kelly truly significant? The correct response is the institutions that guard the gates had to open them for him.
The Chambre Syndicale, it's a federation for ready-to-wear designers in Paris, and it's by membership application. You're voted on by the whole body. And his application was supported by Pierre Berger, who was Yves Saint Laurent's business partner, and Sonia Rykiel, the fashion designer. And this happened in 1988. In the States, he was an anomaly. There were a couple of fashion journalists who said, oh, he always does the same thing. It's always just these, body-conscious clothes with buttons on them. Well, if you look at what we have on exhibition now, you see that's not what he was about. He was much deeper, had a much broader appeal, and there's a timeless quality to the way he designed.
Now let's talk about what you remember when you see Patrick Kelly. If you've seen photos of his work, you've probably seen the buttons, masses of multicolored buttons forming images and patterns and even architectural motifs, buttons that became graphics, buttons that became texture, buttons that became attitude. Museums still point to these as some of the most memorable pieces, and the brilliance is this. Patrick could take something very, very ordinary, something very familiar, something very domestic, and elevate it into a runway level art. That's not just design, that's cultural translation, turning everyday materials and Black visual language into high fashion without asking permission. He also layered in ribbons, hats, bold accessories, and playful silhouette language that leaned into humor and magnetism. Patrick's playfulness wasn't fluff, it was a weapon. Patrick Kelly created work using imagery pulled from popular culture and, yes, at times controversial racial caricature motifs, bringing racial stereotyping and its ugly history into high fashion conversation. Now, this is where some viewers get uncomfortable, and that discomfort is part of the point. Patrick was doing something many institutions still struggle to do: archiving the truth without sanitizing it. He was essentially saying, you don't get to enjoy Blackness as style while pretending the stereotypes and violence attached to it never existed.
When I was a little kid, my grandmother used to work in wealthy homes in Mississippi, and she came home with a fashion magazine. And I don't think I was even 12 years old. I know I was a kid, first grade or something like that. And I flipped through the magazine, and I was amazed that this was a magazine that only had fashion in it.
And those magazines became an inspiration for Patrick, who asked his grandmother how come there were no Black people in those magazines. He decided that he would be a designer who would change that.
So when you see those garments in a museum context today, the question becomes, is the archive brave enough to hold the full complexity of what Black artists were responding to? Patrick Kelly demanded that bravery. I love this part because it destroys the myth that designers like Patrick were just talented but not commercial. In 1987, the conglomerate Warnaco signed an agreement to manufacture his clothing, and reports from that period note his sales approaching 7 million, meaning that his vision was not only culturally sharp, it was market proven. So no, Patrick Kelly was not some niche cult favorite that the industry didn't know what to do with. The industry knew exactly what it had. And yet, look at how many people today are still discovering like he's the hidden treasure. That's not an accident. That's how erasure works. You can be celebrated in the moment, then quietly minimized in the long story. Patrick Kelly died on January the 1st, 1990 at only 35 years old in Paris. Multiple archival sources note that he died from complications related to AIDS, a reality that shaped and in many cases silenced so many creative legacies in that era.
I hope when they think about me, they think about being happy. There's so much sadness in the world, and if you can stick a button on something or a funny hat, I'm the one for you.
From America to Paris to Tokyo and the world in between, Patrick Kelly, the American in Paris.
Patrick knew where he wanted to be.
Patrick was mostly self-taught. He was an avid student of fashion.
Who had a beard and a little cap, and he was dressed in overalls. He was colorful and new and vibrant.
He knew how to take a piece of fabric and twist it and turn it and drape it on a person and make them look fabulous.
He had multicolored red, blue, yellow, green buttons all over the side and fronts of dresses.
I mean, to walk around with this many buttons and go, somebody has to say something.
This matters for the archive because when a life is cut short, the industry often treats the work like a moment instead of a foundation. Patrick's career was brief, but the influence is long. Proof, major museums have continued to mount exhibitions centered on his work, like Patrick Kelly Runway of Love, love explicitly framing him as joyful, political, and essential. So the question isn't, was he important? The question is, why did it take institutions decades to reteach the public what he already proved in the 1980s? Patrick Kelly belongs in this series because he represents the exact kind of story the mainstream archive often mishandles. A Black designer from the American South who becomes Paris legitimized. A designer whose work is joyful and confrontational, refusing the industry's demand that Black creators be palatable. A designer whose name should be a standard curriculum, but too often lives in special exhibit status. And if you're watching this thinking, how did I not learn this earlier? Exactly. That's why this series matters and will continue doing the work. Patrick Kelly's story is not a sad footnote. It's not a fun 80s moment. It's a reminder that Black creativity has always been multidimensional, tender, hilarious, sharp, political, and glamorous. The archive has to be big enough to hold all of it. And remember his line, "I want my clothes to make you smile." Because when a Black designer says that in a world that profits off of our aesthetics but resists our humanity, smile becomes more than a vibe. It becomes a statement. I'm still here. I'm still creating. I'm still worthy of being seen. We're building a record. We're restoring receipts. And we're saying the names out loud and on purpose.